December 15, 1932. Warsaw, Poland. Third floor, Bureau Cipher, the Polish Cypher Bureau. Cigarette smoke hangs so thick in the room you could almost write equations in it with your finger. The radiator hisses. Outside, Warsaw's winter claws at the windows with icy fingers. Inside, under the yellow glow of tired bulbs, a young man sits hunched over a stack of paper that looks like it might collapse under the weight of its own boredom. His name is Marian Radzuski. He's 27 years old. Wire-rimmed glasses. Clean-shaven. Hair already thinking about receding. Not a soldier. Not a spy in the cinematic sense. Just a mathematician in a rumpled suit with ink on his cuffs and the kind of patience most people only find in prayer. On the desk in front of him, columns of letters. Endless rows of them. Intercepted German wireless traffic transcribed by radio operators elsewhere in the building. QLZ XFW Vienna. HBQPM TDK. To you or me it looks like nonsense. To the older officers in the room, it looks like a waste of a good pair of eyes. Still doing your sums, Pani Matematiku? One of them calls from by the window where two cryptographers in uniform are cleaning rifles. Careful, you'll defeat the Reich with boredom. Laughter. Radzuski doesn't look up. He's heard it all before. Better sums than bullets, he murmurs, half to himself, pencil scratching. Sums don't jam. He underlines a trio of letters that repeat in a suspiciously regular pattern. The Germans have been boasting for years now that their new cipher machine, Enigma, is unbreakable. A marvel of modern engineering, they call it. Keys and lamps and rotors that turn like clockwork. Millions upon millions of possible settings. A fortress made of electricity and smugness. The men by the window believe it. Radzuski does not. On another table, pushed aside to make room for ashtrays, sits a civilian version of the Enigma machine. The Cypher Bureau acquired it through a shell company that pretends to sell office equipment. It looks almost underwhelming. A clunky typewriter with 3 glass windows on top, each showing a letter. A lamp board with 26 tiny bulbs. A keyboard. A plug board. If you press a key, a light comes on. Press A, maybe G lights up. Press A again and it's M this time. Inside, rotors turn, connections shift. No pattern at a glance. That's the whole point. The German army has taken this civilian machine, added a plug board to shuffle letters further, added more rotors and declared the result unbeatable. The older cryptographers here in Warsaw tried the classic tricks. Frequency analysis. Known words, Heil Hitler, and Wetterberged. They found nothing but frustration. But the head of the Cypher Bureau, Captain Maximilian Cieski, took a different tack. If the Germans were using a machine built on permutations, shuffles of letters, who better to attack it than a man trained in the mathematics of permutations? So they hired 3. All from the University of Poznan. All young. Jerzy Rositzky, Henryk Zygalski, and Radzuski. The others went to lunch. Radzuski stayed behind with the papers. He draws another line. Another cycle of letters. Another strange pattern that he feels instinctively should not be there if the German engineers had truly been as careful as they claimed. The joke in the office is that he's just doing sums. What none of them know yet, not even Radzuski himself, is that in that smoke-stained room over those boring papers, he is quietly beginning to dismantle the myth of Enigma's invincibility. Not with a gun. Not with a spy's camera. With pencil, paper, and the conviction that no human-made puzzle is perfect. Behind him, the rifle clacks as the bolt slides home. One of the officers snorts. "You'll see, Marian," he says. "When the war comes they'll need men who can shoot, not men who can add." Radzuski doesn't answer. He's just spotted something in the letters. Crack. So small you'd miss it if you blinked. He leans in. Because when you're about to break the unbreakable, the first sound you hear is not an explosion or a gunshot. It's the quiet scratch of a pencil. The pattern is tiny. 3 letters repeating in a way they shouldn't. Radzuski circles them again, just to be sure he isn't seeing ghosts in the noise. On the page in front of him, one of the German messages begins with a block of 6 letters. QLZ QLZ. Different intercept, same day, different operator, and yet the first 6 symbols on that page also pair up as 1 to 4, 2 to 5, 3 to 6 in exactly the same way. QLZ QLZ. DSFDS. His pencil taps the paper. 6 letters at the front of every message. 3 repeated twice. He glances over to the civilian Enigma sitting on the spare table. The heavy machine stares back at him with blank lamp eyes. The Germans think no one is watching closely enough to notice habits. They're wrong. Behind him, a door opens. Cold air knifes into the room, bringing with it the smell of wet wool and street coal. Captain Maximilian Cieski steps in, stamps snow melting off his boots. "Pan Marian," he says, shaking off his coat. "You're still at it." Radzuski pushes his glasses up his nose. "Sir," he replies. "They're doing something strange at the beginning of each message. 6-letter groups. Doubled. It doesn't fit a purely random machine output." Cieski comes closer, eyebrows lifting. "Show me," he says. Radzuski lays the sheets out. Here. Different days. Different operators. Same structural quirk. The first two three-letter groups, he says tapping, are the same. Not in content. Obviously, the letters change, but in position. 1 to 4, 2 to 5, 3 to 6 always correspond. Cieski frowns. Some operating procedure, he suggests. A mistake? You know what they say about the Germans? Efficient, yes. Perfect, no. Radzuski hesitates. There's something else he wants to show him. Sir, he says, lowering his voice, may I see the French papers again? Cieski studies him for a moment. Then nods. He crosses to a steel cabinet in the corner, unlocks it and pulls out a thin folder tied with string. The outside is stamped with an innocuous label in French. Inside it is anything but innocuous. Months earlier, French intelligence, specifically Gustave Bertrand of the WWII Bureau, had quietly approached Poland with an offer. We have a source in the German Cipher office. He can supply Enigma operating manuals. We cannot make full use of them. Can you? They called the source Asha. His real name Hans Thilo Schmidt. Thanks to him, the Poles had photographs of Enigma rotors, wiring diagrams, operating instructions. Not enough to simply turn the key and read messages, but enough to know how the enemy thought the machine worked. Here, Cieski says, laying the French documents beside the intercepts. Remind me how you described it last week. The WWII permutations? Radzuski's fingers trace the lines as if he's playing a piano. Enigma is a function, he says softly. A mapping from one letter to another. If we fix the rotors and the plug board, each press of a key is a permutation of the alphabet. 26 letters shuffled into 26 positions. He looks up. The Germans change that mapping every day, he continues. Different rotor orders. Different plug board leads. That's what makes the code unbreakable. Too many possibilities to try by hand. Cieski snorts. Unbreakable, he says. A word I have never trusted. Radzuski taps the repeated 6-letter groups again. But here, he says, they have given us structure. Every message begins with an indicator. The operator chooses a 3-letter key, say ABC, then encrypts it twice with the daily setting. ABC becomes 6 cipher letters, with the machine stepping between each press. He scribbles a little diagram, positions labeled 1 to 6, arrows pairing 1 with 4, 2 with 5, 3 with 6. Because they double it, he says, we can see how positions are linked. Not the actual letters, they're scrambled, but the cycles of the permutation hidden inside. To the officers with the rifles, this is gibberish. To a man trained in group theory, it is the sound of hinges starting to creak. So, Cieski says, what does that buy us? Radzuski's eyes gleam behind the lenses. If we collect enough of these doubled indicators for a given day, he says, we can build up the cycle structure of the permutation that represents that day's Enigma setting. He takes a deep breath, heart beating faster. And if we know the cycle structures, he goes on, and we know the theoretical wiring from the French documents, we can set up equations. Equations and permutations. He looks at Cieski. In principle, he says quietly, we can solve for the internal wiring of the rotors and the daily keys themselves. Without ever seeing the military machine. Cieski stares. You can do that? He asks. No one has tried, Radzuski replies. Because no one has treated this as mathematics. They treat it as wizardry. He taps the table hard enough to rattle an ashtray. But it isn't, he insists. It's algebra. High-dimensional algebra, yes, but still just structure. And structures have weaknesses. The radiator hisses. The rifles in the corner gleam dully. You can almost feel the tilt in the room, the subtle shift from mockery to possibility. Cieski straightens. What do you need? He asks. Radzuski blinks. Time, he says. Paper. Every indicator message we intercept, especially those where we know or can guess the plaintext greetings. And access to the machine in the other room when I need to test hypotheses. Cieski nods once. You'll have it, he says. But understand me, Marian, if this works, it will not be a curiosity. It will be dynamite. He leans closer, voice dropping. And if it fails, he adds, nothing changes. The Germans still think they are speaking in thunder and we are deaf. He straightens his tunic. So, he says briskly, do your sums. He leaves him with the papers. The door shuts. The smoke closes in again. Radzuski exhales slowly. He turns back to the letters, now seeing them not as nonsense, but as the shimmering shadow of a structure he can almost grasp. Cycles. Permutations. Unknown mapping X, known wiring A, plugboard P. He begins to write equations in group notation, little loops and compositions that, to anyone else in the building, might as well be hieroglyphs. Somewhere under the penciled loops, there's a sentence in German about weather in Bavaria. He doesn't care what it says. Not yet. He cares about the skeleton behind it. Night deepens over Warsaw. The city settles into winter sleep. On the German side, Enigma operators finish their shifts, secure their machines and go home, confident that their words have vanished into unbreakable static. In this one room, a young mathematician knows better. Because he's just realized something the Germans have not. If you can describe a machine as a permutation, you can attack it with mathematics. And if you can attack it with mathematics, then unbreakable is just another word waiting to be disproved. He dips his pen again. The first boring equations of the war's most important code break begin to march across the page. January 1933. Warsaw. The same room, but the walls feel closer. Daylight is a suggestion behind frost-filmed windows. Inside, time is measured not in minutes but in pages. Pages of intercepted indicators. Pages of permutations. Pages of equations that look like they belong in a university lecture hall, not in the middle of Europe's brewing storm. Marian Radzuski has taken the Germans' arrogance and turned it into symbols. On one sheet, P ring operator R equals sigma P backslash circ A backslash circ R equals backslash sigma P ring operator R equals sigma. On another, A minus 1 ring operator P minus 1 ring operator sigma ring operator P ring operator equals rho A caret, minus 1 backslash circ P caret, dash 1 backslash circ backslash sigma backslash circ P backslash circ A equals backslash RHO A minus 1 ring operator P minus 1 ring operator sigma ring operator P ring operator equals rho. To his colleagues it's nonsense. To him it is the skeleton key. The letters stand not for words but for functions. P for the plugboard permutation. A for the fixed wiring between keyboard and rotors, known from the French documents. R for the internal Enigma rotor wiring, unknown. Sigma, rho for permutations observed from those 6-letter indicators. He is, in essence, trying to solve for R, the heart of Enigma, using nothing but these cycles and the knowledge that no machine, no matter how clever, can escape the logic of group theory. Across from him, Jerzy Radzuski chews on a pencil, watching. You realize, Radzuski says dryly, the rest of Europe is arming and you're dating letters. Radzuski doesn't look up. Some of us court more dangerous companions than others, he murmurs. These letters can kill more men than any rifle if we leave them alone. Radzuski snorts, but there's admiration under it. He's seen the pattern too. He just doesn't live and breathe it like Marian does. The breakthrough doesn't come in a single dramatic moment. It comes in layers. First, by treating Enigma as a permutation group, Radzuski realizes something subtle but devastating. The plugboard, those cables the Germans are so proud of, only scrambles the input and output. It doesn't change the internal structure of the permutation produced by the rotors. If he can deduce the structure, the plugboard becomes secondary. A mask. Annoying but not invincible. Then, by using hundreds of indicator messages where the doubled key was sent at the start of each enciphered text, he builds up the cycle structure of the permutations for each day. Little loops like AQZ, BF, CDHTV. He pins them to a board, one per day. From there, he combines them with the wiring diagrams smuggled by the French and the known static elements of the machine. Slowly the unknowns shrink. What you're doing, Henryk Zygalski says one afternoon watching Marian shuffle pages, is, you're solving the machine, not the messages. Exactly, Radzuski replies. Most cryptanalysts try to guess what a particular message says. He is trying to guess how the machine thinks. Once he knows the thought process, every message follows. Weeks become months. Warsaw's winter gives way to a gray, damp spring. In the cafes, people talk about Hitler's latest speech. In the same, parties argue about money and security. In the Cypher Bureau, one man's world has shrunk to 26 symbols and the ways they can be juggled without repetition. Then one damp afternoon it happens. Radzuski sits back abruptly, chair creaking. Jerzy looks up. What is it? He asks. Marian taps the page in front of him with the end of his pencil. I have it, he says. Jerzy raises an eyebrow. You have what? He says. I hope you mean more than a headache. The wiring, Marian replies. Of one of the rotors. Not from a manual. From the math. He turns the sheet around. There, in neat lines, is a mapping. A EBKC MDF. 26 links. One complete rotor. You're sure? Zygalski asks quietly. Radzuski doesn't answer with words. He stands, crosses the room to the civilian Enigma machine and opens its case. He and the others have already modified it to mimic as closely as possible the military version. Extra wires, substitute plugboard. Now he installs a mock rotor wired according to his mapping. Each connection soldered by hand. Each assumption tested twice. He closes the machine, sets the rotor order and ring settings according to one of the days in his notes. Then he takes one of the intercepted indicator messages. A string of gibberish. He sets the machine. He types. The lamps blink. Letters emerge. Jerzy, he says quietly. Read this. Radzuski leans over. At first it looks like nonsense. Then his brain starts to see German words. WETTERBERICHT. Weather report. Followed by coordinates and wind descriptions that look like they belong in a meteorological office, not in the heart of a mathematical experiment. Jerzy's mouth opens. Holy Mother, he whispers. You've done it? Zygalski reaches out, fingers brushing the keys as if they're hot. You broke Enigma, he says. Radzuski shakes his head. No, he says slowly. I broke this day's Enigma. But if this method holds, and I believe it does, we can generalize. With enough indicators, enough permutations, we can derive the rotor wirings and daily keys systematically. He looks at the machine. At that point, he says, voice almost flat with the enormity of it, the so-called unbreakable system becomes manageable, a tool to be used against its makers. When Cieski returns and sees the decrypted German weather message lying on the table beneath an Enigma machine they were never supposed to understand, he closes the door behind him and just stares. You're certain this didn't come from the French? He asks softly. Or from some loose-tongued German clerk? No, sir, Radzuski says. It came from algebra. He gestures at the rows of equations. We used the documents from Bertrand to know the general shape of the machine, he says. But the internal wirings? The daily settings? Those are ours. Cieski takes a long, slow breath. Outside, a tram clatters past on the street. Inside, the balance of power in Europe shifts just a little, in a room that smells of stale smoke and hot metal. From now on, Cieski says, voice low, no one outside this room uses the phrase, Enigma is unbreakable. Not in front of me. Not in front of anyone. He looks at Radzuski. You will document your method, he says. Clearly. Precisely. As if your life and your country's life depended on someone else understanding it. He pauses. Because they might, he adds. The work doesn't stop. Breaking one-day settings is not enough. The Germans change them every 24 hours. They have 3 rotors to choose from in 1933, meaning 6 possible rotor orders. Later they'll have more. To keep up, the Poles need speed. Human speed is not enough. So Radzuski designed something else. He calls it a cyclometer. A cyclometer. A machine that precomputes the cycle structures of all possible rotor positions and stores them in catalogs. An early mechanical database. Its dials and switches clack as it runs through combinations, logging patterns humans could never compile by hand in time. From those catalogs, the cipher clerks at the Bureau Cipher can, given a day's worth of indicators, quickly narrow down the rotor orders and ring settings. They still need brain work. But the heavy lifting of raw combinations becomes a job for gears, not fingers. Later, as the Germans strengthen the system, adding more plugboard cables, more rotors, Radzuski will go further. He'll design the first kryptologic bomb, the Bomba Kryptologiczna. 6 interconnected Enigma replicas, wired to test possible keys automatically by exploiting the Germans' flawed indicator procedure. The machine clatters and bangs. It's loud. Heavy. Smells of oil and hot insulation. To a casual visitor it might look like a crude industrial control unit. To those who know, it's a weapon. A quiet one. Born from equations. In the barracks, some soldiers still joke about the math boys upstairs. In the mess, someone mimics pushing glasses up his nose and says, "Watch out, Jerry, he's going to differentiate you." But in the inner circles of the Cypher Bureau, the joke has worn thin. Because they've seen it. German messages, once a wall of gibberish, now slowly unfolding into legible orders about troop movements, supply runs, training exercises. They can't read everything. Not yet. But every day they get faster. Every day the Enigma's mystique shrinks. In Berlin, German officers still type complacently, convinced that the spinning rotors and tangled plugboard cables render their words invisible. In Warsaw, a man who was just doing sums has proven otherwise. And no one outside Poland knows. Not in Britain. Not in France. Not in Germany. Not yet. Summer 1934. Warsaw Bureau Cipher. On the surface nothing has changed. The same smoky room. The same Enigma machine on the table, its Bakelite keys worn a little smoother now. The same mathematician, glasses sliding down his nose, pencil smudges on his fingers. But underneath, everything is different. Because now, when the radio operators bring in fresh German intercepts, there is no shrug. There is a process. Stacks of 6-letter indicators, those doubled keys the German operators still dutifully send at the start of each message, are delivered straight to the math boys. Clerks sort them by date. Others run them through Radzuski's precomputed cyclometer tables. Zygalski checks cycle structures against the catalog, narrowing down possible rotor orders. Radzuski double-checks with his own techniques. And the Enigma, that mechanical dragon with its coils and rotors, yields its daily secrets. Not with a roar. With a click. A clerk calls out. "This made to. Today we've got it." Fingers fly over notebooks. The day's key, rotor order, ring settings, plugboard cabling, goes up on a small board inside the secure room. Radzuski sets the modified Enigma accordingly. He takes the first intercepted German message, maybe a routine weather report, maybe something more, and types. The lamps dance. Letters spill onto paper. Once nonsense. Now words. Albungsangriff, training attack. Battalion, battalion. Within hours, Polish intelligence knows more about the internal workings of the Wehrmacht than many of its own officers suspect. They read training schedules, logistics reports, complaints from field units about fuel and spare parts. Occasional personal messages slipped in against regulations. Nothing earth-shattering at first. But like frost lines creeping across a window, a picture slowly forms. The secrecy is suffocating. In a government room just down the corridor, a colonel slams his fist on a table, arguing for more cavalry funding. We must have horses, he insists. The Germans understand the importance of maneuver. We must match them. In another room, politicians bicker over budgets, over whether to spend scarce zloty on tanks, aircraft, or fortifications. Almost none of them know that, upstairs, 3 young mathematicians have turned part of the German war machine into a glass box. Some intelligence makes it to the general staff. Summaries, paraphrases. Never the method. Never the word, Enigma. Radzuski and his colleagues are ghosts behind the curtain. Even within the Bureau Cipher, compartments exist. Downstairs, traditional cryptographers grumble over manual ciphers from lesser adversaries, unaware that the real game is being played with machines and mathematics above their heads. One evening, as Radzuski leaves the building under a dim street lamp, coat collar turned up against the Warsaw drizzle, a sergeant from another section falls into step beside him. Long day with your sums? The sergeant asks, half teasing. You should come to the range with us. Learn to shoot something more exciting than numbers. Marian smiles faintly. I'll stick with my sums, he says. I'm told they're cost-effective. The sergeant laughs and peels off toward the tram stop. He never sees the classified intercept tucked under Radzuski's arm. A German order granting funds for new tank training exercises in East Prussia. The kind of detail that, in the right hands, might shape a nation's entire strategic posture. Late 1936. The work has grown too big for chalkboards and intuition. The Germans have expanded their Enigma use. More traffic. More keys. More discipline. They have also begun to tighten procedures, prodded perhaps by their own security men. The indicator system, the doubled 3-letter key, is still in use but small refinements creep in. The plugboard grows more complex. The Poles keep up. Barely. To maintain speed, Radzuski designs his next weapon, the bomba kryptologiczna. It doesn't look like a bomb. It looks like an industrial nightmare. Tall metal frames. Rows of Enigma rotors mounted in series. Bristling wiring. Contact drums. Motors that hum and whine when power is applied. 6 Enigma equivalent stacks, all turning together, testing key after key by exploiting the predictable structure of those doubled indicators. When it runs, it fills the room with clacks and clicks. To stand beside it is to feel the war's future pressing in on your ears. At first, even some within the bureau roll their eyes. More toys, one officer mutters. Next he'll be asking for a mechanical pencil to sign the surrender. Then they see it work. TypeScript spills out of the attached printers. Test keys rejected. One survives the barrage of logical conditions. That key, one tiny island in a sea of impossibilities, matches the day's Enigma setting. Again, Sieski says, staring as if the machine might suddenly grow teeth. Do it again. They do. Different day. Different intercepts. Same result. The bomba reduces what would have taken days of manual permutation checking to hours. Multiply that across multiple machines and you have something approaching real-time insight. Not total. Not yet. But terrifyingly close. In Berlin, the Reich's officers grow even more confident. They expand Enigma to the Luftwaffe, to the Navy, to the railways. Orders fly back and forth, wrapped in rotors and plugs. Unbreakable, they still call it. The salesmen at Cipher and AG boast in brochures about absolute security and the impossibility of cryptanalytic solution. If any German cryptographer expresses a tiny doubt, it is washed away in the tide of propaganda and hierarchical assurance. Their enemies are backward, they are told. They don't have the resources. They don't have the brains. They certainly don't have access to the machine. In Warsaw, a small cadre of men quietly beg to differ. The political weather worsens. Hitler remilitarizes the Rhineland. Annexes Austria. Carves up Czechoslovakia at Munich. Polish newspapers print headlines. Cafes buzz with arguments. At the Cypher Bureau, the headlines are almost background noise. Because while the world watches tanks and parades, they watch logistics. They see train schedules tightened. Reserve call-ups described in bland administrative Enigma traffic. Munition shipments to border depots. In intermittently readable messages, they even see hints of German plans and war games that assume Poland as an enemy. They pass what they can up the chain. Sometimes it changes policy. Often, it disappears into the murk of politics. One evening, over weak tea in their office, Jerzy slams a file shut. We give them gold, he says bitterly, and they argue about who pays for the shovel. Zygalski shrugs. When you prove how something works, he says, you don't always get to decide how it's used. He looks at Marian. But understand this, he adds. Whatever the generals do or don't do, those men in Berlin typing on their enigmas are naked to us in ways they would call impossible. He smiles thinly. And they will never thank you for it. December 1938. The blow comes quietly. On a routine day, amid routine intercepts, a clerk bursts into the math section with a look that is not routine. Panowy, he says. You need to see this. He lays new intercepts on the table. Same layout. Same format. But when they start running the indicators through their carefully built catalogs, something is off. The cycle structures don't match. The known rotor wirings don't fit. The familiar patterns fray. Radzuski feels a chill settle in his stomach that has nothing to do with the Warsaw winter. He flips through the data again. Same conclusion. They've changed something, he says quietly. What? Cieski demands. Marian points to the inconsistencies. Up to now they've had 3 rotors to choose from, he explains. 3 disks. 6 possible orders. We've reconstructed their wirings. Built our cyclometers and bombas accordingly. He exhales. Now, he says, the structure suggests they have more. The rumor arrives a few days later, confirmed by intelligence from France. The Germans have introduced 2 additional rotors into their military Enigma inventory. 5 rotors now, any 3 of which can be selected and placed in the machine in any order. 5 choose 3, 60 possible rotor orders instead of 6. Multiply that by the increased plugboard complexity and ring settings, and the key space explodes. The bomba, as currently built, cannot handle the expanded combinations in time. It's not that Enigma has become theoretically unbreakable again. But practically? For a small country with limited resources, it might as well be. In the quiet that follows the news, you can almost hear something else. The clock. Ticking. Counting down to a war everyone in this room knows is coming. And now the advantage they've held in secret for half a decade is under threat. What do we do? Jerzy asks. Radzuski looks at the Enigma machine on the table, at the bombs humming in the next room, at the stacks of catalogs they've painstakingly compiled over the years. His answer is simple. We adapt, he says. But in his gut he knows something else. Poland may not have the time to adapt alone. The math that quietly doomed Enigma might now need a bigger stage. And bigger allies. July 24, 1939. Pyry, south of Warsaw. A clearing in the Kabety woods. The pine trees sway gently in the summer heat. It's the kind of day made for picnics, not for changing the course of a war that hasn't quite started yet. A car crunches up the gravel drive toward a low, unremarkable villa hidden among the trees. Another follows. Men get out, some in civilian suits, some in uniforms without insignia. They shake hands without names. To anyone watching from a distance, it looks like a mundane diplomatic visit. It is not. Inside, behind drawn curtains, the air is cooler. Intense. Polish officers from the Bureau Cipher stand around a long table. At one end, Captain Maximilian Cieski and Major Guido Langer, their faces more lined than they were a few years ago. Near the middle, slightly back from the front, is Marian Radzuski, flanked by Jerzy Radzuski and Henryk Zygalski. They are not here as equal partners. Officially they are just cipher clerks. At the other end of the table, British and French representatives take their seats. From France, Gustave Bertrand, the man who years ago slid those first Enigma documents across a table toward the Poles. From Britain, men from the Government Code and Cipher School, GC and CS, based at a place called Bletchley. One of them, thin and intense, is Alistair Denniston. Another, with a sharp profile and quick eyes, is Alfred Dilwyn Dilly Knox. They've come expecting help. A nudge. A clue. An exchange of minor insights about a troublesome German cipher machine. What they're about to get is something else entirely. The meeting begins with formalities. Polite, stiff. Coffee is served in small cups. Maps of Europe lie on a side table, borders already feeling provisional. Then Langer clears his throat. Messers, he says, switching to French with a Polish lilt. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. We have much to discuss and not over much time. He glances at Cieski. The captain nods to Marian. Pan Radzuski, he says. If you would. Marian rises. His palms are damp. He's more comfortable with chalk than with diplomats. On the table in front of him is a plain wooden box. He flips the latches and lifts the lid. Inside, nestled in straw, is something that makes the British delegation sit up straighter. An Enigma machine. Not the civilian model. A Polish-built replica of the German military Enigma, complete with plugboard and correctly wired rotors, based on years of mathematical reconstruction and intelligence. Denniston's eyes widen. Dilly Knox leans forward almost out of his chair. We were told, Knox says carefully, that you had made some progress. I did not realize you had this. Langer smiles thinly. Anglo-French understatement has always amused us, he says. We have not merely made some progress. We have been reading German Enigma traffic on and off for several years. The silence in the room is almost physical. Bertrand breaks it first. Vous plaisantez, he breathes. You're joking. Sieski shakes his head. No, he says. We are not. Over the next hour they lay it out. Not everything, not yet, but enough. How French intelligence provided early documents and manuals. How the Poles treated Enigma as a mathematical object, not just a mechanical curiosity. How Marian used permutation theory and the indicator procedure to reconstruct the rotor wiring. How they built cyclometers and then bombs to keep pace with daily key changes. Marian does not brag. He explains. Quietly. Precisely. He draws simple diagrams on a pad, loops showing cycles of letters, arrows indicating compositions of permutations. At one point, Knox, himself a classicist turned codebreaker, interrupts. You're saying, he says slowly, that you deduced the wiring of the German service rotors from traffic alone, without ever having one in your hands. Yes, Marian replies. We had the general structure from the commercial machine and the French material. But the specific military wirings? Those we obtained here. He taps his temple. And here, he adds, tapping the paper. Deniston exhales long and low. At Bletchley, he says, we have some very talented men. Mathematicians. Linguists. We have been circling Enigma. But we have not broken it. Not like this. He looks at the machine in the box as if it has grown fangs. And you share all this, why? He asks. For a moment the air thickens again. Then Langer answers, voice flat. Because, he says, we do not expect to stand alone for long. If war comes, and it will come, we will be the first to feel it. He spreads his hands. We have solved Enigma up to now with limited resources. But the Germans are already changing procedures. Adding rotors. The cost of keeping up is rising beyond what Poland can bear alone. He nods at the British and French officers. You have more money, he says. More factories. More men who can build the machines we can only sketch. He glances at Marian. And you have something else, he adds. Time. When the Germans come, they will be marching on our streets, not yours. Bertrand swallows. And you are willing to give us this? He asks. The machine, Langer says. Our methods. Our understanding of the rotor wirings. Zygalski's perforated sheets. The concept of the bomba. All of it. He pauses. On one condition, he says. Deniston's eyes narrow. Which is, he asks. That you use it, Langer says simply. There is a moment, just a heartbeat, where you can feel history balance on a knife edge in that little villa in the woods. If the British and French had come a year earlier, perhaps pride would have kept the Poles' work hidden. If they had come a year later, there might have been no Bureau Cypher left to meet them. But here, in July 1939, with German demands on Danzig rising and Europe bracing for the worst, the calculus is different. Poland cannot win a code war alone against an industrial giant. But if Britain and France inherit the math, the silence breaks. Knox pushes his glasses up, leans over the machine and begins peppering Marian with technical questions. About rotor notch positions, plugboard behavior, the indicator's weaknesses. They switch to more precise language, half math, half engineering. Deniston and Bertrand confer in low voices. You can almost see the realization settling on them. This changes everything. Britain has been preparing for a long cryptanalytic struggle against Enigma, an uphill slog that might take years. Poland has just handed them a ladder. Maybe 2 years of work. Maybe more. Sketched in neat, smudged handwriting by a man most of Whitehall has never heard of. When the meetings at Pyre end, each ally leaves with more than they brought. The French receive their own replica Enigma and details of the Polish methods. The British load a machine into a crate, along with wiring tables and notes that will be locked in a safe at Bletchley Park. On the drive back to Warsaw, Marian sits in the back of a car, the trees of the Cavity Woods scrolling past the window. Jersey breaks the quiet first. Well, he says. We just gave away our crown jewels. Zygalski smirks. Better to give them to people who might keep the museum open, he says. Marian watches sunlight flicker through the pine branches. We didn't give it away, he says eventually. We extended it. Jersey glances at him. And if they forget us, he asks. If, in London and Paris, they tell the story later as if the work began there? Marian shrugs, a small, tired motion. Then Enigma will still be broken, he says. And German messages will still bleed secrets. If the price of that is being a footnote, I can live with it. He pauses. It would be nice though, he adds quietly, if someone remembered that before Bletchley and before the bombs in their sheds, there was a smoky room in Warsaw where people thought the boring sums might matter. The car bumps over a rut. In the distance, beyond the trees, the future is already forming. In a few weeks, German troops will cross a border. In a few months, Enigma machines will be clicking furiously as orders fly across Europe. The Reich still believes its code is unbreakable. After Pyre, that belief is on borrowed time. Not because of some cinematic dash across enemy lines, but because one quiet man chose to treat a cipher machine like a puzzle, not a prophecy, and then chose to share the solution. September 1st, 1939. Warsaw. Dawn. The first sound is not paper. Just bombs. Distant at first, flat thud somewhere beyond the city, but close enough that the windows in the Cypher Bureau rattle in their frames. Someone drops a stack of intercepts. They fan across the floor like a burst deck of cards. In the corridor, boots pound past. No look. To the shelter, someone shouts. They're hitting the railway yards. In the math room, Marian Radzuski doesn't move. Not yet. He's standing in front of a cabinet, one of the locked ones, watch in hand. The bombing is not a surprise. Not really. They've seen it coming in Enigma traffic for weeks. Orders to mobilize. Rail movements toward the border. Air unit redeployments labeled as exercises, no one believed. He looks at the others. Jersey. Henryk. Sieski in the doorway, tie loosened for once. This is it then, Jersey says, trying for lightness and failing. Your sums weren't boring enough to stop a war. Radzuski closes the cabinet. Inside are copies of rotor wirings, permutation tables, sketches of bombs and cyclometers. Things you would not want to fall into German hands. Nothing we did here was ever going to stop it, he says quietly. All we could do was try to make it less lethal. Sieski claps his hands once. Listen, he says sharply. We have rehearsed this. He points. Non-essential documents are to be burned, he says. Core materials, wiring diagrams, method notes, our own replicas, will be evacuated. There is a plan to move bureau personnel, including you three, out of the capital. We go south then, we'll see. He looks at the ceiling as another, closer explosion makes plaster dust flutter down like dirty snow. This building will not survive the month, he adds. Our work must. The next days are chaos. Not the orderly kind of chaos that lives in permutations and equations. The real kind. Trains jammed. Roads clogged with refugees. German aircraft prowling for columns on the move. In a convoy of cars heading south from Warsaw, squeezed between suitcases and crates, there's a wooden box that doesn't look like much. Inside it, a Polish-built Enigma. Beside it, folded papers and sealed envelopes, rotor wirings, explanatory notes written in Marian's tight hand, diagrams of bombs and Zygalski sheets. Radzuski clutches his satchel like it's a life jacket. In a sense, it is. Not for him. For everyone else. Beside him in the car, Henryk stares out the window at fields rolling past, some already scored with bomb craters. You realize, Henryk says quietly, if we get caught with this, we will not be treated as ordinary prisoners. Marian nods. That's why, he says, we will not get caught. Jersey snorts. And you say I'm the optimist, he mutters. They cross bridges half an hour before they're bombed. They sleep in schoolhouses and church halls with broken windows. At one point, when a Stuka appears overhead, they abandon the car and dive into a ditch, covering the box with their own bodies. The bombs fall elsewhere. Or maybe the war's strange sense of humor. Eventually, the Polish state collapses under the twin blows of German invasion from the west and Soviet invasion from the east. There are no more official orders. Only instincts. France, Langer says over a crude map spread on a farmhouse table. The French help start this work. They will help continue it. We go through Romania, then across the Mediterranean if we can. The documents go with us. He looks at the mathematicians. You're not just clerks anymore, he says. You are carriers. Of something our allies will need. Marian says nothing. He feels exhausted down to his bones. But when they set off again he carries his satchel. Because he understands something fundamental. Wars erase borders. But they do not erase math. The Germans can burn Warsaw to the ground. They can seize every Enigma machine in the country. They cannot uninvent the permutations in his head. Autumn 1939. PC Bruno near Paris. The new place is not a forest villa. It's a French chateau at Gretz-Armenvilliers, southeast of Paris, converted into a joint cryptologic center. They call it PC Bruno. On the surface, it looks almost peaceful. Trees, lawns, stone walls. Inside, the war continues in a different form. Poles, Frenchmen, and a handful of British visitors huddle over Enigma replicas, trying to resurrect what had become almost routine in Warsaw. Daily keys. Rotor orders. Plug board settings. Some days it works. The Germans, drunk on victory, grow sloppy. Procedures lapse. Old weaknesses reappear. On those days, Radzuski and his colleagues catch glimpses again. Orders about occupation policies. Redeployments of divisions. Bureaucratic grumbling from German staff officers who think their words dissolve into safe static. On other days, the new rotors and tightened discipline make reading anything in time nearly impossible. Imagine, Jersey says one evening, rubbing his temples, what we could do with proper machines. Bombs built in factories, not on the budgets of a small ministry. Marian nods tiredly. Imagine, he replies, what we could do if we weren't always one German improvement away from being blind. The French provide refuge in resources, but not in limitless quantities. Political will waxes and wanes as the phony war drags on, with no major engagements in the West. To many, cryptanalysis still feels abstract. In Britain, at Bletchley Park, the crates from Pyre have arrived. Mathematicians like Alan Turing and Gordon Welchman take them apart, conceptually and physically. They study the Polish replica Enigma. They absorb Radzuski's notes on rotor wiring and his method of attacking the old indicator system. Then they do what good scientists always do. They build British-designed bombs, faster, more numerous, tuned to the latest German procedures, begin to take shape at companies like British Tabulating Machine. What was a small, desperate engineering project in Warsaw becomes an industrial-scale effort in Buckinghamshire. Bletchley's huts fill with clerks, linguists, mathematicians, and engineers. They step onto a path that Poland paved. Most of them never hear the name Radzuski. But when they switch on their machines and start chasing Enigma keys using logical chains that bear an uncanny family resemblance to the Polish bomba, they are indirectly reenacting his thought process on a larger stage. Back at PC Bruno, the news comes in fragments. A British liaison mentions, over cigarettes, that they are making good use of your gift. A French officer hints that the English have built something very efficient in the Midlands. There's no time for pride. Because in May 1940, the German army rolls west. Blitzkrieg through the Ardennes. France totters. PC Bruno becomes a place not of quiet collaboration but of urgency. One night, as German forces approach Paris, orders come. Evacuate. Again. Burn what you can't carry. Take the methods, leave the furniture. Radzuski finds himself, once more, packing his life into a satchel. Once more, running ahead of a storm. Once more, carrying things more valuable than any suitcase. We keep doing this, jersey size, stuffing notebooks into a bag. One day we'll run out of land to retreat across. Marian folds a schematic of a bomb. I don't care where we end up, he says quietly. As long as someone, somewhere, keeps reading Enigma. He glances out the window where French soldiers are dismantling radio aerials. Because if the Germans ever truly get to speak freely, he adds, this war becomes much harder to survive. He doesn't know that in England, in wooden huts and brick outbuildings, other men are already taking up that burden. With better funding. With more machines. With a head start bought in a smoky room in Warsaw and paid for now in exile. Autumn 1940. Vichy, France. A villa near uses code name Cadix. For the third time in as many years, Marian Radzuski is working in a borrowed house in a country that isn't his. The shutters are closed. The garden outside smells of dust and lavender. Inside, the air hums with the low murmur of French, Polish, and urgent typewriters. PC Bruno is gone, evacuated ahead of the German advance. Now the work continues here in the unoccupied zone of Vichy, France, under a new cover name and an older sense of déjà vu. New address. Same war. Same machine. On a table in a back room, another Polish-built Enigma sits like a captured idol. Around it, stacks of intercepts from wherever French and Polish radio posts can still listen in. North Africa, the Balkans, German naval traffic echoing around the Mediterranean. Radzuski bends over the pages. The work is harder now. The Germans have learned from some of their earlier sloppiness. Indicator procedures have changed. Keys are handled with more care. The Polish methods still apply, but the margin for error is thinner. The time window to extract a day's key before it goes stale is smaller. At Bletchley Park, in England, British bombs are spinning up, large, fast, working from a foundation that began in Warsaw. Here at Cadix they do not have such industrial support. But they do have something else, experience. Jersey slides a fresh set of intercepts onto the table. More Luftwaffe traffic, he says. Africa. Some about convoy escorts. Some about weather. He smirks. Always the weather with these people. Marian glances at the sheets. There is no such thing as just weather in war, he says mildly. Cloud cover and wind tell you where the bombers can go. Or where they can't. He starts marking repeated structures, his pencil moving almost of its own accord now, the habits of years distilled into muscle memory. Across the room, Gustave Bertrand huddles with French officers, whispering about Spanish smugglers, safe routes, fallback plans. On the wall, a map of Europe is studded with pins. Too many of them are German flags. The danger isn't theoretical anymore. In occupied France, the Gestapo and Abwehr are hunting for anything that smells of clandestine radio, secret ink, or intelligence work. Cadix exists in a narrow seam, tolerated, barely, by Vichy authorities who are themselves under German scrutiny. One wrong intercept. One careless word. The entire operation could be swept away. One evening, as they are closing for the night, Henrik voices the question that has been sitting, unspoken, in the corner of the room. What happens, he asks quietly, if the Germans come here? The room stills. Bertrand glances at the door, then leans in. Then we burn, he says simply. Papers. Machines. Anything that can be traced. And we run. Or we hide. Or we are taken. He shrugs, a small, fatalistic gesture. For now we work, he adds. Because every day we read even a fraction of their traffic is a day they are a little less omnipotent than they think. Radzuski nods. He knows the calculus. He also knows that the more the British succeed with their own bombs, the more likely it is that the work they started in Warsaw will continue even if Cadix is silenced. But that doesn't make it easier to sleep. January 8, 1942. Somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea. A French passenger ship, the Le Moricier, fights a winter storm. Waves hammer her bow. Wind claws at her superstructure. On board is Jerzy Radzuski, traveling under false papers, tasked with shuttling between North Africa and Cadix, part of the dangerous logistics chain that keeps intercepts flowing and people moving in the shadows. He is not at his desk with a pencil now. He is on a deck that heaves under his boots, surrounded by strangers who have no idea that the quiet Polish man near the rail has spent the last decade tearing holes in German unbreakable codes. In the early hours in heavy seas and high winds, the Le Moricier sinks. There are no radio intercepts to warn of this. No permutations to prevent it. Jerzy dies with hundreds of others, swallowed by a sea that doesn't care about algebra. At Cadix, when news finally filters back, the silence is heavier than any bomb blast. Henrik sits on the edge of a bunk, staring at a wall that suddenly looks too bare. He should have been safe, he says flatly. He wasn't even at the front. He was on a civilian ship. Marian says nothing. There isn't a permutation that brings a man back. All the math in the world can't solve this equation. Later he will describe it in the driest possible terms in a report. In January 1942, Jerzy Radzuski died in the sinking of the Le Moricier. On paper it looks like a footnote. In reality it's a hole in the line. With the Gestapo's grip tightening and Vichy's collaboration deepening, Cadix becomes untenable. The order comes again. Disperse. Escape if you can. In 1942 French and Polish personnel filter out of the villa in small groups, taking mountain paths towards Spain, hoping to reach Portugal and then Britain. The journey is brutal. Over the Pyrenees at night. Guides who might be patriots or opportunists. Border guards who might shoot or shrug. At one point, Marian finds himself scrambling up a scree slope in worn boots, lungs burning, the cold mountain air sawing at his chest. He clutches at a rock and thinks almost absurdly, "I'm too old for this." He is 41. Behind him, somewhere German radio operators are still typing into enigmas, hearing the comforting clack of keys and the churn of rotors. They don't know that the man who first turned their machine into an equation is slipping through shadows, trying not to be caught with a past that would get him shot. Eventually, after arrests by Spanish authorities, internment, negotiations, and more movement than his bones ever wanted, he reaches Britain. The country that now carries the torch he lit years ago. He steps ashore not as a hero, not as a celebrity, but as another displaced Polish officer in a war-torn system drowning in refugees and requisitions. No red carpets. Just forms. And one more assignment. Spring 1943. Somewhere in England. A nondescript brick building behind a wire fence. The sign outside does not say Bletchley Park. Security signs never do. Inside, the smell is familiar in a way that makes Marian Radzuski's chest tighten. Hot wiring. Cigarette smoke. Paper. Different country. Same war. He's shown to a small office with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a pile of documents already stacked neatly on one corner. A British officer in uniform, not particularly high-ranking, not particularly warm, gestures for him to sit. "Captain Radzuski," the officer says, mispronouncing it slightly. "Welcome to the United Kingdom. I trust your journey was uneventful." Marian thinks briefly of the Pyrenees, the Spanish camps, the interrogations. "Yes," he says. "Very uneventful." The officer nods briskly, either not catching the irony or pretending not to. "Good," he says. "We are, as you may imagine, rather busy." He taps the pile of papers. "We're aware of your work with the Bureau Cipher," he continues. "The material passed to us before the war was invaluable." He says the word like he's quoting from a memo. Marian watches him carefully. "I understand you have had some success here as well," Marian says. The officer allows himself a thin smile. "With Enigma?" he says. "Yes, considerable. Our bombs run day and night. We read a substantial proportion of German Army and Air Force traffic. The Admiralty's U-boat problem is more stubborn, but we are making progress." He doesn't mention names like Turing or Welchman, or the vast mechanical farms of bombs humming away in places like Letchworth. He doesn't need to. The implication is clear. The work that began in Warsaw has evolved. Grown. Scale. In some ways, it has outgrown the man sitting in front of him. "We will, of course, make use of your expertise where appropriate," the officer says. "But the Enigma problem is, shall we say, already in hand. There are other systems, lower priority but still useful, that could benefit from your attention." Marian nods slowly. He expected as much. You don't walk into a machine already in motion and expect to be handed the main lever. "What will I be working on?" he asks. The officer slides the stack of papers toward him. "German SS and police ciphers," he says. Hand systems. Substitute transposition. Not as glamorous as Enigma perhaps, but valuable. Movements of security units. Local orders. That sort of thing. He shrugs. It's all part of the same war. Marian runs a thumb along the edge of the stack. Of course, he says. Sums are sums. You might expect bitterness. Some of it is there. He sits in a drab British office working on ciphers that feel like relics compared to the machine he once peeled open with permutations. He knows that in huts not far away younger men, some his intellectual juniors, some his equals, some his betters, are using bombs and methods that trace their lineage directly back to his algebra in Warsaw. He knows that history, as written by victors, has a habit of starting the story where they join it. But he also knows this. The point was never fame. It was always the messages. Even these petty police reports, SS movement orders, are threads in the same rope. He attacks them with the same quiet ferocity he once reserved for Enigma. Patterns, frequencies, human laziness. The math is simpler. The stakes are not. One decrypted SS message might mean a partisan unit can move safely tonight. One broken police cipher might let London get a clearer picture of occupation policies in some remote corner of Europe. In a war measured in millions, it's hard to see the value of any one message. But Marian has never been fooled by scale. He knows that systems fall not in a single theatrical collapse, but in a million small cuts. He's content, mostly, to keep sharpening one more knife. Outside, the Blitz has faded. The Luftwaffe is no longer the looming threat it once was. Inside the war rooms of London, plots for the North African campaign and the coming invasion of Europe lean heavily on intelligence derived from Enigma and other high-grade German systems. Convoys zigzag where U-boats are not. Rommel's supply lines are strangled by foreknowledge. German plans are preempted, diverted, ambushed. The legend of Enigma's invulnerability, still intact in German minds, is quietly dying in British ones. In all those briefings, in all those corridors, Marian Radzuski's name is almost never spoken. Someone might say, our Polish friends gave us a useful start. Someone might mention pre-war work by the Poles in a footnote. But the details, the smoky room in Warsaw, the permutations, the first reconstructed rotor wiring, are buried under layers of classification and the sheer avalanche of wartime urgency. He knows this. He doesn't complain. At most, on rare evenings when he shares a cigarette with another Polish officer outside a Nisan hut, he'll say, we were there early. That is enough. The other man might nod or swear or shrug. But the war goes on. So does the math. Post-war. The guns fall silent. The codes do not. New systems emerge. New enemies. New alignments. For Marian, the end of hostilities does not bring a triumphant homecoming. Poland is not the same country he left. It exists now as a people's republic under Soviet influence. Returning there as a man who spent the war cooperating with Western intelligence services is complicated. He does it anyway. Back in Poznan, he takes a job as an accountant. He keeps books, balances ledgers, adds columns. Just doing sums, like the old joke. He does not tell his neighbors or his colleagues that once he bent the same skill toward tearing open the Reich's most treasured secret. He cannot. Much of his work remains classified in the West. In the East, the new regime has no interest in celebrating a man whose greatest achievements are entwined with British and French intelligence. So he lives quietly, raises a family, catches the tram, goes to work, comes home. On Sundays, maybe he walks past a public square where speeches are given about heroic socialist labor and the triumph of the people. No one gives speeches about permutation groups. No one mentions the time a young Polish mathematician made a roomful of German generals, thousands of kilometers away, naked without their knowing it. And yet, in a way, the peace he enjoys, the fact that there is still a Poland however altered, is tied faintly but undeniably to those boring nights in Warsaw. Because Enigma was not simply a gadget. It was the nervous system of a war machine. Severing its privacy shortened the war. Every historian who studies Ultra will tell you that. Ask whether the British and Americans could have broken Enigma in time without the Poles' early work, and the honest ones will hesitate. Maybe. Eventually. But not in 1940. Not in time for the Battle of Britain. Not in time to make the U-boat war winnable. The latter Poland built shaved years off that climb. Those years were measured in ships not sunk. Cities not bombed. Men not killed. Marian does not frame it that grandly. If you asked him, he might say, I wrote some equations. They turned out to be useful. Years later, the story begins to seep out. In memoirs, in declassified files, in interviews with aging codebreakers who still remember the day a Polish-built Enigma arrived at Bletchley in a crate marked as routine cargo. Names like Turing and Welchman rightly gain renown. Books are written. Films made. People come to Bletchley as tourists, walking through huts 6 and 8, marveling at the bombs, the cables, the paper. For a while, the story the public hears is very British. Then, slowly, the Polish chapter is added back in. Historians dig. Old reports surface. Footnotes grow into full paragraphs. The narrative adjusts. Before there was Bletchley, there was Bureau Cypher. Before the British bombs, there was the Bomba kryptologia. Before Ultra was a flood, it was a trickle, started by a man in Warsaw with a pencil and a refusal to accept the word unbreakable. By the time the world properly hears his name, Marian is an old man. He gives a few interviews. Writes a memoir. His voice is still quiet. Precision never left him. He describes his achievements in the cold language of mathematics, not drama. No embellishments. No self-mythologizing. It doesn't matter. The drama is built into the facts. A cipher machine the enemy called invincible. A small country written off by many as technologically backward. 3 young mathematicians who saw not mystique but permutations. And at the center, not a flashy genius striding through corridors of power, but a clerk surrounded by smoke and paper teased for just doing sums, who calmly turned those sums into the most devastating weapon imaginable. Knowledge. In the end, the Enigma legend didn't die in one moment. It died by stages. In Warsaw. In Pyre. At PC Bruno. At Cadix. At Bletchley. But its fate, the fact that it was doomed at all, was sealed the moment someone looked at it and thought, this is not magic. This is math. That someone was Marian Radzuski. A man whose hands smelled of ink, not cordite. Whose battlefield was a desk. Whose weapon was a belief that no human-made system can escape the logic of structure forever. The right called Enigma unbreakable. History disagreed. And if you trace the path back, through bombs and intercepts, through Ultra and U-boat sinkings, you find yourself sooner or later back in that smoky room in Warsaw. Back with a quiet Polish Cypher clerk, his colleagues joking as they polish rifles, while he scratches cycles and permutations on a sheet of paper. Back at the moment when boring math quietly lit the fuse that would years later blow apart the myth of Enigma's invincibility. Not with a bang. With a pencil. Indeed.